Hello, sunshines. You did it. You're on the last chapter, chapter 24, Human Population, Limited Resources, and Pollution. So this chapter is kind of a broad look at human population, how populations grow, how that affects the earth, and then look a little bit at climate change. Okay, so we're going to focus a lot of this chapter on population dynamics. That's how populations change in size. Are they growing? Are they decreasing in size? Are they influenced by other populations, by their resources, etc.? So population size, births increase the size, deaths decrease. So if you want to look at the overall growth or decrease of population, you would look at basically births minus deaths. And if that number is positive, the population is increasing. If it's lower, then population size is decreasing. So here in Sweden, we can see for this time frame, what is going on? Okay, so in this area, the birth rates are much greater than the death rate. So from about right after 1800 until 1920 or so, there was a huge difference between births and deaths, where there was a lot more births, so their population was growing. And then they got closer, so there was less growth. And now they're about the same, or even the deaths are higher, so their population is growing less quickly. And so if you look at an area and you look at the ages of the people that are there, that can tell you about the population, how it's going to change over time. So the age structure shows oldest, youngest, and what percent of the population they make up, or what proportion, or in this case, total in millions. And you can see that in an expanding population, there's a lot of little kids, and there's not very many old people. So those will age and reproduce more. There's a lot of people in that high reproductive range. One of the main factors is the age that a female has her first kid, because that talks about the amount of children she can have, right? Because there's a limited time frame where that can occur. So in areas where the average age for having children is younger, you'll see a more expanding population. The best way to reduce population increases education. In areas where women are more educated formally, they have lower population growth rates in general. In this next example, we've got moderately stable, pretty much flat here. And then Canada population is declining. They have more people outside of that reproductive range than any of the other ages. So they're not going to really be having any more offspring, so they'll just, when they go, they won't contribute to any more births. So there are two types of growth patterns that populations can exhibit. The first is exponential growth. So basically, if you have no constraints, and it's just about how many offspring you can produce, you'll grow exponentially, right? Like a pair of cats. So I put in this image. In 1 year, you've got 12 cats at the end. After 2 years, if they all have offspring, 67. And after 8 years, you've got 2 million. So that's a huge increase. Obviously, in general, you're not going to have every offspring reproduce, but in ideal scenarios, you would. You can see this really quickly in bacterial colonies. They'll grow at exponential rates. You'll have, one cell divides into 2, 4, 8, etc. on as they continue doubling. So this is the human population, starting about 8,000 years ago. This is billions of people. And you can see that population is slowly increasing, exponentially. And then once you start to get up, those exponentials really grow quickly. It's kind of like a J shape. So we're projected to be about 9.3 billion in 2050. That is, if we haven't hit our carrying capacity. In that case, we would look at logistic growth. So logistic growth kind of starts out exponential, but then you reach a maximum amount of individuals where That's as much as the population can hold. That's called carrying capacity. Let's draw. Max population supported by environment. And there's a couple ideas on what humans' carrying capacity is, anywhere from 5 billion to 20. So some people say we've already reached ours and we're overreaching, and we'll use up resources, and then our population will crash. Okay. Usually you'll see once you reach carrying capacity, you'll fluctuate above and below over time. This figure shows in red exponential growth, in blue that logistic, where you start out strong but then you slow down as you get towards that K, the carrying capacity. Okay? You'll see these change over time as the carrying capacity changes. There's a really fun example of lynx and hares, where when the hare population goes higher, the lynx carrying capacity is higher because they have more food. Then they eat all the rabbits, and then the hare's population drops, and then the lynx carrying capacity drops, and you'll see them fluctuate as over and over in regards to the other. Okay. So ecological footprint, the resource use per individual in different areas is not equal. So the bigger the bigger the footprint of individuals in that area. U.S., Mexico, quite large, whereas Rwanda, quite small. So one thing that we should all be trying to do is reduce our ecological footprint. Getting things more locally, reducing consumption, getting goods that you can either recycle or don't come with packaging. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce really being the most important one there. Okay. What can happen if we use too many resources? One is desertification, where you'll have like prairies, etc., go towards deserts, so they'll dry up. On the left we have an example of a grazed area where there's too many grazers and they've eaten all the grass, and so there's no deep-rooted plants holding water. It's exposed soil, so it gets water and it dries out very quickly. Issues there, a big one is soil erosion. So if water comes by, there's not really any roots holding it in place, so it washes out more quickly. This is happening all over the earth at a quick rate. There was a really interesting TED Talk by Alan Savory about desertification, and he actually argues that they use grazing, but they move the grazers from area to area so one doesn't get overgrazed. And then as the grazers move through, stomp things down, urinate, and deposit feces, they're putting new nutrients in. And it's worked in several areas for him. Although this TED Talk is really great and inspiring, there is some criticism from the scientific community because he hasn't really cited his work well, and it hasn't been reproducible for others. So it's interesting, but take it with a grain of salt. Next, deforestation. So again, we're in that like H of HIPCO, the habitat loss. We're cutting down forests at a quick rate. This 11 deforestation facts, one of them is we take out tropical rainforests the size of South Carolina every year. And so often they'll use the slash and burn method to get those nutrients into the soil quickly, but then they grow monocultures and they use up all the nutrients there and then they move on. And it decreases their soil fertility. Things to note there. Usually we're just like, well, they shouldn't do that. But the people there are just trying to survive and feed their families. And so to really make changes, you have to look at how you can help those people in other ways. Give them other businesses to run, fair trade prices for their products, how to farm more sustainably. Okay. And then overfishing. This is that overexploitation. Worldwide, at least 80% of fisheries are overexploited. This NPR link is to the first part of a two-part NPR interview with Daniel Pauly, who is a scientist that's looking at overexploitation of fish, and it's really interesting. I highly recommend listening to it. Some of the big picture topics he discusses there is how you can eat seafood more sustainably and support a sustainable system. I highly recommend checking it out. Okay, and next resource, water. So we've got 97% of the Earth's water is in the ocean, so there's only 3% fresh. And of that fresh water, we are polluting a lot of it, and we're using a lot of it. So fresh water can be something that wars will be fought over. It's such an important resource that we don't have a ton of and we're not taking good care of. This is showing how pollution gets into the water. There's two types of ways to get pollution in there, point source and non-point source. So basically, is it like point source, a factory, or non-point source, like the fertilizer from people's lawns, right? But anything that goes into the soil can run down into the water. In rivers around areas of agriculture with like a lot of cows, for example, you'll have higher levels of E. coli. In areas where you'll have mining, you'll have more sediments in there. Things that we flush, those endocrine receptors for like hormonal birth control that go into the water can change the gender of fishes and their fertility. All of those things can get in really quickly, especially because we take out areas that are deep-rooted plants. If you look at your lawn, you're probably not looking at these deep-rooted bushes and plants everywhere. You're looking more at regular lawn grass. That's called fescue. It's really short-rooted, so long roots do a lot of good things. They help hold on to the soil better. They're going to help filter out those pollutants better, and they're going to decrease the amount that go down into our water systems. They're also going to hold water there better, so you'll have less desertification. So you can think also about the ways that you can reduce your water use. A big one is toilets. So if you want to adopt if it's yellow, let it mellow, that's always a good idea. That's my husband's favorite thing. I do it. Doesn't make me happy though. I do it. And then climate change. So we briefly discussed this a little bit, but overall the average temperature of the Earth is rising, and the National Committee looking at climate change has found two things going on, that there's more greenhouse gases and that it's human caused. And so this is looking at temperatures over time, looking at carbon dioxide levels, first from ice cores, which is really cool. They can look at the levels of carbon dioxide in the different layers of the ice and tell what the levels were each year. Look more greenhouse gas. But not only does it increase the temperature in most places, in some areas it's actually decreasing. But overall it's increasing. And you can see how as our population grows, as we consume more per person, we're increasing our fuel use, our deforestation, more greenhouse gases, our atmosphere warms. As glaciers melt, you'll have higher sea levels, you'll have different ocean currents, you'll lose biodiversity. All of these terrible things, economic loss. Unfortunately, we don't really tie economic losses here very well to what we're doing, but they have caused billions of dollars in economic losses, and they'll cause more. We've seen droughts and flooding more frequent and more extreme. And let's look a little bit more at how greenhouse gases actually function. So the more greenhouse gas you have here, the more solar energy that goes back that gets reflected in again. So it's like a greenhouse. It traps those gases in, they stay warm. Not the same as the ozone layer. The ozone is O3, and that helps reduce UV rays getting through. Okay. And last little bit, optimism. This is Jane Goodall. She has a lovely new documentary on Disney Plus I recommend. And she is working on this program called Roots and Shoots, where she gets young kids in all sorts of areas involved in protecting biodiversity and learning its importance and helping them to do that. Have a lovely day.